A homeless boy discovers a millionaire's lost documents. However, what he requested in exchange for returning the documents left the millionaire speechless. In the heart of the city, where lights flickered from towering buildings and the noise of cars filled the air, a young man scavenged through a pile of garbage. His clothes, tattered and worn, told a story of hardship. Life had been cruel, and every day was a fight for survival. Today, his hands moved through the trash with practiced precision, searching for something, anything, that could help him make it through another day. Then, his fingers touched something smooth and unfamiliar. Startled, he pulled it out from the pile and found himself holding an elegant leather wallet, so out of place among the waste. For a moment, he just stared at it, his heart racing. A wallet like this didn't belong in a place like that. It was high quality, the kind that only someone wealthy could afford. Curiosity got the better of him, and he opened it slowly, half expecting it to be empty or filled with expired coupons. But what he found made his breath catch in his throat. Inside were credit cards, cash, and documents, including an ID. His eyes scanned the name on the ID, and shock hit him like a wave. It belonged to a man who was known throughout the city, a millionaire. This wasn't just any wallet. It was the property of a powerful and wealthy man whose face was plastered on magazine covers and TV screens. The young man couldn't believe his luck. For a brief moment, the world around him seemed to stop. He stared at the ID again, confirming that this was real, that this wallet, with all its valuable contents, had somehow fallen into his hands. His mind started racing. The credit cards alone were worth a fortune. He could sell them, use them, maybe even disappear and start a new life. The temptation was overwhelming. After all, what was one wallet to a man who had everything? For someone like him, living on the streets, the money from those cards could mean food, shelter, and a way out of this endless struggle. He knew people who could take the cards off his hands, no questions asked. The streets had taught him how to survive, how to seize opportunities when they came. And this was the biggest opportunity he had ever stumbled upon. But as his mind played out the possibilities, a different thought crept in. What if he returned the wallet? What if, instead of taking advantage of the situation, he did the right thing? Maybe, just maybe, this could lead to something better than a quick escape. Maybe the millionaire, grateful for the return of his precious belongings, would offer him a reward or even a job. It was a long shot, but the idea of changing his life in a way that didn't involve crime lingered in the back of his mind. The decision weighed heavily on him. His entire life had been about survival, doing whatever it took to make it through another day. But this moment felt different. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about what kind of person he wanted to be. Could he really walk away from this wallet, knowing the kind of life it could buy him? Or was there a chance, however small, that returning it could change his fate for the better? With the wallet in his hand, he looked around at the bustling streets, people passing by without a second glance in his direction. To them, he was invisible. But with this wallet, he held something that could make him seen, something that could make him matter. The thought of meeting the millionaire filled him with a mixture of fear and hope. What if this was the break he had been waiting for? What if this was his chance to finally escape the streets? His heart pounded as he weighed the options. The easy way out was right there in his hands, but the possibility of something more, something life-changing, hung in the balance. He thought about the life he had lived, the struggles he had faced, and the dreams he had almost forgotten. Could this wallet be the key to unlocking those dreams? The temptation to keep it was strong, but so was the pull to take a risk on something bigger. Finally, he made a decision. He wasn't sure if it was the right one, but it felt like the only choice that would allow him to sleep at night. He would return the wallet, but he wouldn't just hand it over. No, if he was going to make this choice, he would do it on his terms. He would demand something in return, not money, but an opportunity. He wasn't looking for a handout. He was looking for a way out, a chance to prove that he was worth more than the streets had made him. As he walked away from the garbage, wallet in hand, a sense of purpose filled him. This wasn't just about returning something lost. This was about taking control of his own life, about facing the man who owned the wallet and asking for a shot at something better. His future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was a future he could almost believe in. Now, all that remained was to find the courage to follow through. His mind was made up, but doubts lingered. What would the millionaire say? How would he react? More importantly, what would this decision cost him? The young man now held the millionaire's wallet, a symbol of everything he could have, but also everything he could lose. His steps were slow as he wandered through the city streets, the weight of his decision pressing heavily on his mind. On one hand, selling the cards and documents would offer an immediate solution to his struggles. The streets had taught him that opportunities like this didn't come often, and survival often depended on seizing the moment. A quick sale, a handful of cash. He could buy himself days, maybe weeks of security. But was that all he wanted? As he continued to walk, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more at stake than just money. This wasn't just about getting by for a few more days. It was about his future, his identity. The temptation to sell the contents of the wallet gnawed at him, whispering promises of an easier life. But deep down, he knew that a life built on quick gains would be fleeting. His heart wavered, torn between the fast escape money offered and the uncertain possibility of something greater. Could he really risk turning away from what could be his one chance at a better life? He found himself sitting on a bench in a quiet park, the wallet resting on his lap, still unopened since the first discovery. The weight of the documents inside seemed to echo the weight of the choice before him. One path led to the market, where he could disappear into the anonymity of the city's underground. The other path, returning the wallet, was filled with uncertainty. What if the millionaire didn't care? What if no opportunity came from his act of honesty? The streets had shown him that people with money often didn't see those without it. He was used to being invisible. Yet, the idea of doing the right thing wouldn't leave him. It wasn't just about morality. It was about proving something to himself. Life had stripped him of so much, but his integrity was something he still clung to, something that defined who he was beneath the grime of the streets. As he sat there, wrestling with the decision, he realized that this moment was bigger than the wallet. It was about reclaiming a part of himself that he had almost lost. The streets had hardened him, but they hadn't completely taken away his sense of right and wrong. This was about more than survival. It was about self-respect. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. He would return the wallet, but he wouldn't just return it passively. No, he would make sure that this act of honesty didn't go unnoticed. He needed more than a thank you, more than a reward. He needed an opportunity. His mind raced as he formulated a plan. He wouldn't ask for money. He wouldn't ask for a handout. He would ask for something that could change his life. A job, a chance to prove himself. This wasn't about begging. It was about negotiating his future, about taking control of his destiny. But doubts lingered. What if the millionaire rejected him outright? What if he was seen as nothing more than a thief trying to manipulate the situation? Fear crept into his thoughts, threatening to paralyze him. He had spent years being dismissed, overlooked, and ignored. What if this time was no different? The young man knew he couldn't let fear dictate his actions. This was his moment to take a risk, to put everything on the line. Yes, there was a chance he would be turned away, but there was also a chance, however small, that this could be the break he'd been waiting for. He stood up from the bench, his mind made up. He would face the millionaire and present his offer. As he walked through the city, the hustle and bustle of everyday life swirled around him, but his focus remained clear. This was more than just a moral decision. It was a strategic one. If he could convince the millionaire to give him a shot, his life could change forever. His hands tightened around the wallet, as if holding on to the last thread of hope he had. He wouldn't let this opportunity slip away, not without giving it his best shot. With each step toward the millionaire's office, the young man's resolve grew stronger. He had nothing to lose and everything to gain. His heart pounded with the uncertainty of what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for sure. This was his chance. And if there was one thing he had learned on the streets, it was that chances like this didn't come often. The outcome was still unknown, But the decision had been made. He would ask for a job, for a way out of the streets, and for the opportunity to prove himself. The question was, would the millionaire listen? As the tall buildings of the city loomed closer, the young man felt a mix of fear and excitement. His future hung in the balance, and with each step, the reality of what he was about to do became more and more real. He knew that this meeting would either change everything or leave him right where he started. But either way, he was ready. He had lived his entire life in the shadows, but now he was about to step into the light, even if only for a moment. Whatever happened next, he would face it head-on. The decision was made, but the hardest part was yet to come. What would happen when he stepped into the millionaire's world? The young man stood in front of the towering skyscraper, its glass exterior reflecting the bustling city below. His hands were clammy, and the wallet felt heavier than before, as if it carried the weight of his future. Taking a deep breath, he stepped through the revolving doors, entering a world that seemed completely foreign to him. Inside, everything was sleek and polished, a stark contrast to the grime of the streets. People in suits rushed past him, their expressions focused and indifferent. For a moment, he felt out of place, a trespasser in a world that wasn't his. But he couldn't turn back now. He approached the reception desk, his heart pounding in his chest. The receptionist, a woman with a perfectly pressed suit and a cold gaze, barely glanced at him as he nervously cleared his throat. I need to speak with Mr. Torres, he stammered, clutching the wallet tightly. The receptionist raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. Do you have an appointment? She asked, her tone making it clear that she didn't expect him to. The young man shook his head, his voice faltering as he explained, No, but I have something that belongs to him. It's important. Her skepticism was palpable. The receptionist glanced down at the wallet, her expression changing slightly when she recognized the name on the ID. Without a word, she picked up the phone and made a call. The young man could only hear fragments of the conversation, but it was clear that his presence had caused some interest. Moments later, a security guard approached him, motioning for him to follow. As he was led through the pristine hallways of the building, the young man's nerves intensified. The further they walked, the more he realized how far he was from the world he had known. He wasn't just out of his element, he was on a different planet. Finally, they arrived at a large, imposing office. The guard knocked once before opening the door, revealing a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the entire city. And there, behind a massive desk, sat Mr. Torres, the millionaire whose wallet he had found. The man barely looked up as the young man entered, his attention focused on the papers in front of him. You're the one who found my wallet? Mr. Torres asked, his voice calm but commanding. The young man nodded, stepping forward and placing the wallet on the desk. The millionaire picked it up, flipping through its contents with a practiced ease. There was a moment of silence as Mr. Torres inspected the wallet, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up, his sharp gaze locking onto the young man. I suppose you're here for a reward, he said, his voice laced with expectation. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. The young man hesitated, his palms sweating. This was the moment he had prepared for. But now, standing face to face with the man who held so much power, the words seemed to catch in his throat. He could feel the weight of Mr. Torres's scrutiny, and for a brief moment, doubt clouded his mind. What if he was wrong to ask? Summoning all his courage, the young man shook his head. I don't want money, he said quietly, his voice growing stronger with each word. I want a job, a chance to prove myself. The request hung in the air, echoing in the vast office as if it were the most unexpected thing Mr. Torres had ever heard. The millionaire leaned back in his chair, surprise flickering across his face. For a man used to people asking for cash, this was something entirely different. He studied the young man for a moment, clearly intrigued by the boldness of the request. It wasn't what he had expected. Mr. Torres leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk as he considered the young man's words. A job? He repeated, as if testing the idea. The young man nodded, his heart racing. He could feel the tension in the room, the unspoken challenge in the millionaire's eyes. You're asking me for an opportunity instead of money. Why? Mr. Torres's question cut through the air like a blade. The young man swallowed hard, but he didn't back down. Because I don't want to survive, I want to build a life. And I can't do that without a chance, he replied, his voice steady. For a moment, the room was silent. Mr. Torres's eyes narrowed as he scrutinized the young man, clearly trying to make sense of him. The millionaire had seen countless people beg for his help, but none had ever asked for something like this. He leaned back again, tapping his fingers on the desk as he weighed his options. The young man stood there, waiting, the tension thick in the air. He had said what he came to say, and now it was out of his hands. The silence stretched on, the uncertainty gnawing at him. But he refused to break eye contact, determined to show Mr. Torres that he was serious. Finally, Mr. Torres spoke. You know, most people would have taken the money and run, he said, his voice thoughtful. But you didn't. You came here, and you asked for something much harder to give, trust. The young man held his breath, unsure of where the conversation was headed. Mr. Torres seemed to be weighing his decision carefully, as if deciding whether this gamble was worth it. I'll be honest, the millionaire continued. I don't know if I can trust you, but I'm willing to hear more about what you want. Let's see if you're as serious as you seem. The young man had laid his cards on the table, but the real test was just beginning. Could he convince Mr. Torres to take a chance on him? The young man took a deep breath, knowing this was his moment to speak. Mr. Torres had given him an opening, and now he had to make his case. His voice trembled at first, but as he spoke, conviction took over. I don't need charity, he began, his eyes locking with Mr. Torres's. I need a chance. Just one shot to prove that I can be more than what my circumstances have made me. His words, though simple, carried the weight of someone who had spent too long on the edge, waiting for life to give him an opportunity. And now, standing in front of a man who could change everything, he had to make it count. Mr. Torres's expression shifted ever so slightly, his curiosity evident. This wasn't what he had expected. Most people in the young man's position would have begged for money, a quick escape from the hardships of life. But here was someone asking for something more, something much harder to give. A job? Torres asked, almost to himself. The young man nodded, a sense of urgency growing in his voice. Yes, I don't care what it is. I'll start at the bottom, do anything you need. I just want the chance to prove that I can do more, that I'm capable of changing my life. Silence fell between them as the millionaire leaned back in his chair, clearly deep in thought. The young man's request wasn't just unusual, it was bold, audacious even. For a man who had built his empire on taking risks, Mr. Torres couldn't help but feel a flicker of admiration for the young man's courage. But admiration alone wasn't enough. He needed to know that this wasn't some desperate attempt to grab onto the first lifeline. Why should I trust you? He asked, his voice steady but firm. The question lingered in the air, demanding a response that could tip the balance one way or another. The young man hesitated for only a second before responding. Because I've got nothing left to lose, and that makes me dangerous in the best way. I've spent my life fighting to survive, and now I want to fight for something bigger. Give me a task, a challenge, anything, and I'll prove to you that I'm not just another face on the street. His words carried an edge, a raw determination that couldn't be faked. Mr. Torres, still skeptical but intrigued, leaned forward, resting his hands on the desk. And what if you fail? He asked, his voice low but pointed. The young man didn't blink. Then I'll have learned something valuable, but I won't stop trying. I've failed plenty of times before, but each time, I've picked myself back up. That's the difference between me and someone who's just looking for an easy way out. I'm willing to work for it. His gaze never wavered, and in that moment, something shifted in the room. Mr. Torres, a man who had built his fortune on calculated risks, recognized the same fire he had once carried in himself. It was the fire of someone who refused to be defeated by circumstance, someone who was willing to push through the impossible. Mr. Torres stood up, walking over to the large window that overlooked the city below. He stared out at the skyline, lost in thought. While the young man waited, heart pounding, this was the moment. Everything hung on what Mr. Torres decided next. The millionaire remained silent for what felt like an eternity before finally turning back. "I didn't get where I am by giving people chances for free," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "But I've learned that sometimes the right opportunity given to the right person can change everything." The young man held his breath, waiting for Mr. Torres to continue. "You say you're willing to start at the bottom," the millionaire mused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "That's good, because I don't give handouts. But I'm not convinced yet. You'll have to earn it, every step of the way." The young man nodded, his heart racing but his resolve unwavering. This was the opening he needed, the sliver of hope that he could turn into something more. "I'm ready," he said quietly but firmly. "Whatever it takes." Mr. Torres remained silent for a few more moments, as if weighing the risks one final time. Then, with a slight nod, he returned to his desk. "I'll give you a chance, but it's not going to be easy. You'll start tomorrow, and you'll work under one of my managers. If you show me you're serious, then we'll see where this goes. But make no mistake, I won't hesitate to fire you if you waste this opportunity." The young man could hardly believe what he was hearing. It wasn't a promise of success, but it was a chance, and that was all he had ever asked for. He stood up, his legs trembling slightly, but his heart soaring with the possibility of what this opportunity could mean. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Mr. Torres didn't respond immediately, simply nodding before turning back to his work. The meeting was over, but the young man's journey had just begun. As he walked out of the office, the weight of his past seemed to lift slightly, replaced by the heavy but welcome burden of hope. The young man had his chance, but doubts remained. Could he live up to Mr. Torres's expectations? And what would happen if he didn't? After the young man left, Mr. Torres remained seated at his desk, staring at the closed door. His mind raced with thoughts he couldn't easily dismiss. The young man's determination had caught him off guard, and for the first time in a long while, Torres found himself second-guessing a decision. Had he made a mistake? Was this young man really worth the risk? Torres had built his empire on careful calculations, weighing every decision against the potential cost. But this was something different. It was a gamble, one he wasn't sure he should have taken. As he turned his chair to face the view of the city skyline, Torres couldn't help but replay the conversation in his mind. The young man had spoken with conviction, but conviction wasn't always enough. Torres knew that better than anyone. He had seen countless people with passion and drive, only to watch them crumble under the pressure of real work. Was this young man any different? The streets could harden someone, but they could also break them. Torres had seen both outcomes, and the line between success and failure was often razor-thin. Despite his doubts, there was something about the young man that Torres couldn't ignore. He had seen desperation before, but this felt different. The young man hadn't begged for money or tried to manipulate the situation. Instead, he had asked for an opportunity, a chance to prove himself. That kind of audacity was rare, and Torres respected it, even if he wasn't entirely convinced. But respect alone wasn't enough to guarantee success. Torres knew that trust was earned, not given, and the young man had a long way to go before he earned that trust. Torres's mind wandered back to his own past, to the early days when he had fought to build his business from nothing. He, too, had been given a chance by someone who believed in him. But the difference was, Torres had been prepared to seize that chance with both hands. He had been relentless, ruthless even, in his pursuit of success. He wondered if the young man standing before him had that same fire, or if he was just another person looking for an easy way out. The doubt gnawed at him, pulling him in two directions. On one hand, Torres wanted to believe that the young man could rise to the occasion, that his request for a chance was genuine. On the other hand, years of dealing with people who had let him down had made him cynical. He had seen too many promising individuals crack under the weight of responsibility. He couldn't afford to be sentimental in business. Giving the young man a job was one thing, but allowing him to stay if he failed, that was another matter entirely. The stakes were too high to let emotions cloud his judgment. As the hours passed, Torres tried to focus on his work, but the nagging doubt remained. He called one of his managers and informed him about the new hire, emphasizing that he would be watching closely. If he falters, don't hesitate to let him go, Torres instructed, his voice sharp. This was a test, not just for the young man, but for himself as well. Could he still trust his instincts? Or had the years of success dulled his ability to see potential in others? Torres hated the uncertainty, but there was no turning back now. The decision had been made. That night, Torres found himself unable to sleep. His thoughts kept drifting back to the young man's face, the intensity in his eyes, the way he had spoken about wanting to change his life. It reminded Torres of something he had long forgotten, the hunger for a better life, the desire to prove oneself. It stirred something in him, something he had buried under years of wealth and power. But just as quickly as the memory surfaced, Torres pushed it away. Sentimentality had no place in his world, and he couldn't afford to be distracted by it. Still, the doubt lingered. What if the young man really was different? What if, despite the odds, he succeeded? Torres couldn't shake the feeling that he had set something in motion that he couldn't control. The young man's success or failure would reflect on him, too. If this gamble paid off, it would prove that Torres's instincts were still sharp. But if it didn't, it would be a reminder that he had lost touch with the world beyond his empire. The weight of that uncertainty pressed down on him, heavier than he had anticipated. The next morning, Torres arrived at his office early, his mind still swirling with doubt. He checked in with his manager to see if the young man had shown up for his first day of work. To his surprise, the manager reported that the young man had arrived before anyone else, eager to begin. Torres felt a small flicker of relief, but quickly suppressed it. One day of punctuality didn't prove anything. The real test would come in the days and weeks ahead, when the young man would have to prove not just his dedication, but his ability to handle the pressures of the job. The young man's journey had only just begun, but Torres's doubts still loomed. Would the decision to hire him turn into a regret, or would it reveal something greater? The young man's heart raced as he stepped through the doors of the company for his first day. Everything around him felt surreal, as if he were an outsider observing a world he didn't belong to. The bustling office, the focused employees, none of it matched the chaos of his past life on the streets. But here he was, ready to prove himself. His clothes, still modest but clean, were a reminder of how far he had come. Yet, doubt clung to him like a shadow. Could he really fit into this new world? And more importantly, could he succeed where so many others had failed? His manager, a stern-faced man named Gomez, met him in the hallway. Without much of a greeting, Gomez handed him a pile of paperwork. "You'll be starting with the basics," he said, his tone clipped and indifferent. There was no warmth, no encouragement, just the expectation of competence. The young man nodded, accepting the papers with a quiet determination. This was what he had asked for. After all, a chance to start from the bottom and work his way up. But now that he was here, the enormity of the task ahead of him felt almost overwhelming. He couldn't afford to fail. As he settled into his small desk, tucked away in a corner of the bustling office, the young man felt the weight of Mr. Torres's expectations. He knew the millionaire was watching, waiting to see if he would crumble under the pressure. The work was tedious at first, filing, sorting, and data entry. But the young man attacked each task with a focus that surprised even himself. Every moment, every detail mattered. This wasn't just a job. It was his lifeline, his one shot at a different future. And he wasn't about to waste it. Days turned into weeks, and the young man worked tirelessly, staying late, arriving early, and taking on every task that was thrown his way. Slowly, his colleagues began to take notice. They had initially dismissed him as just another temporary worker, someone who wouldn't last long. But his dedication and work ethic spoke louder than any words could. The young man didn't seek attention or praise. He simply did what was asked of him and more. And though he hadn't yet crossed paths with Mr. Torres again, he knew that his progress was being monitored closely. Despite his growing confidence, the young man couldn't shake the constant pressure. He was acutely aware that one mistake could cost him everything. Mr. Torres had made it clear. There were no second chances. This job wasn't a gift. It was a test, and the stakes were impossibly high. The young man often found himself lying awake at night, replaying every decision he made during the day, every task completed. Was it enough? Had he proven himself? The fear of failure gnawed at him, but so did a newfound sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he was on the right path. But then came the moment of reckoning. One afternoon, as the young man was knee-deep in paperwork, Mr. Torres appeared in the office. The room seemed to freeze as the millionaire strode toward him, his presence commanding attention. The young man's heart pounded in his chest, his hands suddenly clammy. This was it, the moment he had both dreaded and anticipated. Mr. Torres didn't say a word at first, simply observing the young man's work, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. The silence was suffocating, but the young man refused to let his nerves show. Finally, Mr. Torres spoke. "You've been here for a while now," he said, his tone neutral, giving nothing away. "What have you learned?" The question hung in the air, loaded with expectation. The young man took a deep breath, forcing himself to speak clearly. "I've learned that hard work isn't enough," he replied, meeting Torres's gaze. "It takes consistency, focus, and a willingness to push through when things get tough." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "But I'm not just here to survive. I'm here to succeed, and I'll keep working until I do." Torres's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Approval, perhaps, or maybe just curiosity. "Consistency is key," Torres said slowly, as if testing the idea. "But it's not everything. You'll need more than that if you want to move beyond where you are now." The young man nodded, understanding the challenge that lay beneath the words. He wasn't being handed anything. If he wanted more, he'd have to prove himself again and again. And that was exactly what he intended to do. After a long pause, Torres finally nodded, a small but significant gesture. "You've done well so far," he said, his voice still measured but carrying a hint of something resembling respect. "Keep it up, and we'll talk about your future here." With that, Torres turned and walked away, leaving the young man standing in the middle of the office, his heart racing with both relief and anticipation. It wasn't a promise, but it was enough to keep him moving forward. The real challenge was just beginning. The young man had made it through the first test, but the road ahead was long. Could he continue to rise and prove his worth, or would the pressures of this new life catch up with him? The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, as the young man settled into his new life. The routine of the office had once felt foreign, but now it was a part of him. He had learned to navigate the demands of his job, growing more efficient and confident with each passing day. His colleagues, once indifferent, had started to acknowledge his presence, nodding at him in the hallways, offering small words of encouragement. Slowly, the young man realized he wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. His hard work was paying off, and for the first time in his life, he felt a sense of belonging. His dedication didn't go unnoticed. Gomez, the manager who had initially doubted him, began assigning him more challenging tasks. At first, the young man had been unsure if he could handle the increased responsibility, but as he tackled each new assignment, he found that he was more capable than he had ever imagined. The fear of failure that had once haunted him began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence. He was no longer the scared, desperate person who had walked through the doors that first day. He was evolving, becoming someone stronger, someone with purpose. But with success came new challenges. The higher he climbed, the more pressure he felt to prove himself, not just to Mr. Torres, but to everyone around him. His days were long, filled with endless tasks and meetings, and though he thrived on the intensity, there were moments when the weight of it all felt overwhelming. Yet, no matter how tired he was, no matter how hard the work became, the young man never lost sight of what he was working toward. This wasn't just a job to him, it was his future, and he was willing to do whatever it took to secure it. As he continued to rise within the company, the young man's transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. He began to take pride in his appearance, dressing sharper, holding himself taller. The streets had once stripped him of his dignity, but now, each day in the office, he felt like he was reclaiming it piece by piece. He had come so far from the boy who had once scavenged through garbage, and though the journey had been hard, the progress was undeniable. Yet, even as he changed, he never forgot where he came from. Mr. Torres watched this transformation from a distance, quietly impressed by the young man's resilience and growth. Though he had been hesitant at first, he now saw the potential in the young man that he had once doubted. Torres had given him a chance, but it was the young man who had taken that chance and made something of it. The millionaire, a man who rarely admitted to being wrong, found himself rethinking his initial skepticism. There was something special about this young man, something that went beyond hard work. It was as if he had been waiting his entire life for this moment. The young man's success began to ripple through the company. His colleagues, once indifferent, now respected him. Some even sought his advice, recognizing the unique perspective he brought to the table. He had started at the bottom, and yet, here he was, rising faster than anyone could have predicted. But despite the admiration he received, the young man remained humble. He knew that his journey was far from over, and there was still much to prove. Success had opened new doors for him, but it had also brought new expectations, and he wasn't about to let anyone down. As the young man grew more confident, he began to take on projects that required leadership. Gomez, impressed with his work ethic, had recommended him for a promotion, and soon, the young man found himself in charge of a small team. Leading others was a new challenge, but one he embraced wholeheartedly. He treated his team with the same respect he had craved when he first started, earning their loyalty and trust. It was a new kind of responsibility, but one that felt natural. For the first time in his life, the young man wasn't just surviving, he was leading. Still, the young man couldn't help but feel the weight of his past at times. Though he had worked hard to build a new life, the memories of the streets never fully left him. Late at night, when the office was empty and quiet, he would sit at his desk and remember the struggles he had endured. It wasn't out of regret, but as a reminder of how far he had come. He used those memories to fuel his drive, to remind himself that no matter how hard things got, nothing could be as hard as what he had already survived. His past, once a burden, had become his strength. But even as he embraced his success, the young man knew there was more to achieve. He hadn't come this far just to settle. The hunger for more, for better, still burned inside him. He was no longer satisfied with just proving himself to Mr. Torres. He wanted to go further, to become someone who could truly make a difference. The young man's ambition had grown, and with it, his vision for the future. He had transformed, yes, but this was only the beginning. The real challenge was yet to come, and he was ready for it. The young man had transformed, but what came next would test not only his abilities but his values. Could he stay true to himself as he climbed even higher? The young man stood at the edge of his new life, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He had come from nothing, with no connections, no resources, and no one to rely on. And yet, here he was, standing tall in a world that had once felt out of reach. The opportunity Mr. Torres had given him had changed everything, but it wasn't just the opportunity itself. It was what the young man had done with it. He had taken that single chance and turned it into something more, something greater than either he or Mr. Torres could have imagined. It was proof of what one moment, one decision, could spark. As he walked through the office, now filled with colleagues who respected him and clients who trusted him, the young man couldn't help but think about how fragile opportunities could be. He had seen others fall short, wasting their chances or never being given one at all. The streets had taught him that life wasn't fair, that not everyone would be lucky enough to have someone like Mr. Torres cross their path. But the young man also knew that when opportunity did knock, it was up to the individual to seize it with everything they had. He had learned that lesson well. The millionaire, for his part, had been watching the young man's ascent with quiet satisfaction. Torres had given opportunities to many people over the years, but none had embraced it with the same ferocity. There was something about the young man's determination, his refusal to let circumstances dictate his future, that had reignited a spark in Torres himself. It reminded him of his own early days, the hunger that had driven him to build his empire. The young man had become more than just an employee. He had become a reflection of the values Torres admired, but had sometimes forgotten in the pursuit of success. Despite all his progress, the young man remained grounded, never allowing the trappings of success to cloud his memory of where he had come from. The streets had shaped him in ways that could never be undone. They had taught him resilience, grit, and the importance of never taking anything for granted. And now, even as he climbed higher, he carried those lessons with him. He knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but he had faced the worst life had to offer and come out stronger. Opportunity had given him a path, but it was his own perseverance that kept him moving forward. Torres had seen the transformation firsthand, and it had given him pause. He had always believed in the power of hard work, but watching the young man's rise reminded him that sometimes all someone needed was a single chance to prove themselves. The millionaire, who had built his success on the back of his own grit, realized that in giving this young man an opportunity, he had rediscovered something within himself. It wasn't just about building businesses. It was about building people, about recognizing potential where others only saw desperation. Torres had learned, perhaps for the first time in years, that success wasn't just about money. It was about impact. The young man's journey wasn't over, but he had already achieved more than he had once dared to dream. And yet, with each new milestone, he found himself wanting to give back, to offer the same kind of opportunity that had changed his own life. He began to think about how many others were out there, just like him, waiting for someone to see them, to believe in them. The streets were full of people who had been forgotten, but the young man hadn't forgotten them. He carried them with him, their stories intertwined with his own, fueling his drive to keep climbing. As his career continued to flourish, the young man knew that his next steps would define not only his success but his legacy. It wasn't enough to rise through the ranks. He wanted to make a difference. He had been given an opportunity, and now it was his turn to create opportunities for others. The thought consumed him, pushing him to think beyond his own success and towards something bigger. The young man had transformed, yes, but now he wanted to use that transformation to help others do the same. It was a vision that gave his success deeper meaning, a purpose beyond himself. Mr. Torres, seeing the young man's ambition, couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The young man had proven himself in every way, and now he was poised to take on even greater responsibilities. Torres knew that his initial hesitation had been unfounded. This young man wasn't just a hard worker. He was a leader, someone who could inspire others and drive change. Torres had given him a chance, but it was the young man who had done the work. And now, as the young man's mentor, Torres found himself invested in his success in a way he hadn't been in years. It was a reminder that leadership wasn't just about power. It was about passing the torch. In the end, the young man's story was a testament to the power of opportunity. It wasn't a straight path, and it wasn't without its challenges, but that single chance had opened doors the young man had never imagined. And as he stood on the cusp of even greater success, he knew that his journey was just beginning. There was so much more to achieve, so many more lives to touch. The opportunity had changed his life, yes, but now he was determined to change the lives of others. The cycle of opportunity, once set in motion, had the potential to keep spinning, creating ripples that would extend far beyond him. The young man's journey has only just begun, but what's next for him? As he continues to rise, the stakes get higher, and the decisions he faces will shape not only his life but the lives of others around him. Will he continue to carve out his own destiny, or will the weight of his past catch up to him? You won't want to miss what happens next. Make sure to watch the next story that's already waiting for you. It's filled with new twists and unexpected turns that will keep you on the edge of your seat. And don't forget, if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another gripping story. Leave a comment below and let us know your thoughts. What did you think of this journey? There's so much more to come.